Good evening and happy Giving Tuesday. We are here live at the Intellectual Radio Station. This is the Justice Team, Justina Winfrey and Mr. John Carter. Happy Giving Tuesday. Mr. Carter.
Hello, Ms. Winfrey, and hello, everyone. It is great to be back with you again. I hope everyone had a very good Christmas weekend, and we are here to get back into business today. So hopefully everyone has their pencils and paper ready to take some notes. We're going to be talking about some interesting topics today that concerns and relates to you getting a fresh start in life. We had talked about getting fresh starts in finances, but today we're going to talk about how to make sure that the opportunities that you have are well placed and that they are there for you and that folks in the system don't take advantage of you.
So, the first topic this evening will be how to get a fresh start and where do we even begin if in fact you have, let's say, a criminal record. What are the first steps?
Well, what happens is most people, unfortunately, or some people, I should say, unfortunately, don't always have the opportunity to avoid a situation where they are confined. They end up being arrested. They end up being a part of the penal system. Some folks think it's by design. My humble opinion, I think a lot of it is by design as well. It is a way that you could keep certain people or certain classes or culture of people out of the mainstream, or at least keep them under certain controls by certain government entities or methods or whatever. That being said, if a person comes into a situation where they have police contact and they end up being arrested, it's very important to understand what the civil process or the criminal process, more importantly, is, that your rights are not even further violated. Don't think that because you're contacted by a police official or even by a court official, judges, lawyers included, that they're going to defend and protect your rights. That's not always the case. The truth of the matter is, even though there are members of the criminal justice system that are part of that system, it does not necessarily mean that they fully understand the law. The law is not an exact science. It's open to a lot of interpretation. Sometimes those interpretations are very wrong. So let's start with a person who is arrested and taken down to booking, and he's booked in. Once you are in custody, once you are in police custody, the agency becomes solely responsible for you. That is why they take a certain amount of care to make sure that in the transport of the person who was arrested, that they safely make it down to the jail or the booking facility. Once that officer turns the person over to the booking facility, they become responsible for that inmate. Now you're going to be termed as an inmate. Well, here's the deal. Notice that if the person is injured, sick, extremely ill, or intoxicated, extremely intoxicated, under the influence of an alcoholic liquor or drugs to the point that they're pretty much incapacitated, the jails will usually refuse or reject that individual. The reason being is because if you go into a toxic shock, the jail has now assumed that liability for your well-being. They have to make sure that you receive medical treatment, which comes out of their budget. They have to make sure that you are well cared for, which comes out of their budget. And rather than to do that, they rather have the officers take you to a medical facility first or to a detox and have you detox before they actually take you into custody or before they book you into their facility. So that's number one. So if you know or you yourself are injured, even by the police, if they throw you to the ground, bust your face up, your lips or whatever, you can demand to be transported to a hospital to be medically treated before before you're taken to the jail. If they take you to the jail first, and some officers are ignorant, I mean, they don't understand their responsibilities under the law. Once you get down to the jail and booking, immediately demand and insist on seeing a doctor because you're injured. They will refuse to take you into booking and insist that you be taken to a hospital first. That way, the cost is on the city and not on the county. And that money is saved in their budget for having to transport you to a medical facility. Now, they do have pharmacies and infirmaries, is what they call them, in jail, where a person can also be treated. But those are usually reserved for folks who have already been incarcerated, or have already been booked in the process, and something happened to them while they're in custody. If you're coming from outside, typically, that's not what they like to do. Second thing, once you have gone through that process, and say you're in jail and now you're going to come to your arraignment. An arraignment is where you plead guilty or not guilty. From the time that you are arrested to the time that you are arraigned, typically they have to bring you before a magistrate within 48 to 72 hours. You have to go before a magistrate. If you're arrested on a weekend and there's a holiday that follows, it may be a little longer before you can be seen. But in certain cities like, New Orleans, for example, they have what they call a night magistrate. That in that jurisdiction, you have to be seen, or you have to be brought before a judge within 48 hours of your arrest, no matter what. Whether it's the weekend, the holiday, or whatever, they have to have a judge that's working during the night hours or during that weekend that can actually arraign those folks. So in other jurisdictions, they'll let you sit in jail until the next business day or the next business time. So that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But this is the fact. Once you have been charged, and usually when you go to an arraignment and you plead guilty or not guilty, they'll read the charges off to you. From the day that they read those charges to you to the time you're brought to trial, typically you have 6 months, 180 days. If the prosecutor does not bring you to trial within that 180 days, they must dismiss the charges and release you from custody. Now, sometimes people will post bail after their arraignment. Let's say you go in, you plead not guilty. Now, this doesn't apply if you plead guilty or no contest. There's a whole different procedure. But if you plead not guilty and now you are released, and you get out on bond, even though you are free on bond, the reason that you're free is to be able to, prepare the evidence for your case and to defend yourself. While you're out, the prosecutor still has to bring that case to trial within 180 days, in 6 months from the time that you were actually charged with the crime. What happens typically is that most folks will get a public defender. Big mistake. It is better to have your family to call the state bar of the jurisdiction where you live, or find someone who knows someone who can find an attorney who will represent you at little or no cost than to use a public defender. Because a public defender, their budgets are very, very small. New attorneys usually get jobs like that. Very few of them, I can't say all of them, are not committed, to the criminal law process, but for the most, it's just kind of a rite of passage, or they're just going through to get to where they really want to go. But that being said,
I think we have a caller calling in, John.
Oh, do you? Okay. Well, let's see what the caller has to say.
I believe that it's actually Justin Turner calling in. He just sent a message on social media and requested the call-in number. He had inboxed regarding a situation. So actually, I'll go ahead and forgive me for interrupting, Mr. Carter. We'll get Justin Turner on the line in 1 minute.
Oh, okay. Well, so once a person is charged, the prosecutor has 180 days to bring them to trial. Now, if that doesn't happen, the charges have to be dismissed. The person has to be released. The bail money should be returned. But what a lot of public defenders will do, and some of the attorneys, so you got to be very careful about this, because even attorneys that you pay money to, which is even more of a travesty of justice if this happens, some attorneys, some defense attorneys will, because they're busy, they don't have a lot of money going, you're not paying them very well, they will continue your case. Something to come up, oh, I didn't have time to do this, let's continue the case. Oh, we're doing some pretrial investigation, so we're going to continue the case. Be very careful if your attorney, as a defendant, is continuing the case, and they're continuing it over and over again, because that's expending the time. Now, when it gets close to the 180 days where you have to be prosecuted, or have to be tried at least, what the prosecutor will do, he will no longer agree, usually 90 days out, to continue the case again voluntarily, unless the defendant waives their right to a speedy trial, because you have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. That's where this 180-day or 6-month deal comes in. Okay, so if your attorney waives your right to a speedy trial, which is actually you waiving your right to a speedy trial, then the prosecutor has to whenever to charge you, or rather, or to formally charge and bring you to trial. They have until whenever to actually bring you to trial. So you can actually sit in jail for a year or two before you're actually brought to trial. And that's why you have a lot of folks in jail right now, particularly black men that are in jail. Some of them have been there a year or 2 years and have not even gone to trial yet, because somewhere in that early stage, they agreed or allowed their attorney to have them to sign a waiver of their speedy trial. Mm-hmm. There is no way on heaven's earth that a person should ever waive their right to anything. A defendant in a criminal case should never waive their right to anything, ever, especially waiving your right to a speedy trial. If the prosecutor has a baby, goes on vacation, gets caught up in the rapture, I don't care what their excuse is, their duty, the duty of the prosecutor is to do justice. That is the duty of the prosecutor in every jurisdiction. And if they can't do that, they should not be practicing law. So if they can't bring those charges in that trial against you to fully adjudicate that case in 6 months, that's plenty of time for them to gather evidence. That case should be kicked. And that's the way that works. But so many of our people get caught up by not understanding how the system works, and we waive our right. If a lawyer comes to ask you to waive your right to anything, you need to be looking for a new lawyer. Because why would you waive a right that you have? The reason that it's there is to protect you. Why would you give it away? And you just open yourself up to be taken advantage of. So the goal, and what we're going to be, discussing tonight, even in more depth, is what do you do to truly get a fresh start? Number one, know your rights. Know what this criminal justice system can and cannot do to you as an individual. You have a right to a speedy trial, and the courts have determined that a speedy trial is to bring you from formal charges being brought against you to your court date, to your trial date, is 180 days. Okay. 6 months. Okay, are you ready?
Yes, we have a caller.
Okay, go ahead.
Caller, are you with us?
Hello, yes, I'm with you guys. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I hear you just fine. Yes, we can hear you just fine.
All right, I want to piggyback on some of the things that John said. It's a shame. It's a shame how the legal system is doing our African-American males. I don't even want to say African-American males, because if you're not even going to say white American males, then it's not even, don't stimulate me as being African-American. Stimulate me as being black like I stimulate you as being white. But that's a whole nother story. Anyway, I called because the police actually whipped my ass the other day for no reason. And they stipulated me as a drug dealer. And it's just sad that the rhetoric that the police officers, the whole entire police department do to African American, black males, and these were black cops that stereotyped me as being a drug drug dealer. Now, Justina, you know me. You know please. That's not even in my character. Selling drugs, no. How to be a real estate mogul, yes. But anyway, the police officer used aggressive force, slammed me onto the ground, and they, what else did they do to me? They beat me in the head, put me in the neck, hit me in the neck, not knowing that I told them that I had a traumatic brain injury. One of the police officers asked me, what's that? No, I think the police department is not educating their police officers on what is and what's not, and that's why something has to be done about this aggressive force that's being done. All you see on the news is that black people killing black people. That's all the media wants you to see. The media don't want you to see anything else but negative images of black neighborhoods, and it's so. I hate that they put this facade up of Black Lives Matter. They just want us to act like a fool. Even though the Constitution says that we have a right to protest, but they're trying to make a mockery of us. They're trying to make a mockery of us, and I'm not going to like it anymore. I don't like it, period. And I understand everything. I don't know his name was Jeff, Ron. I understand everything he was saying about protocol, and I believe all that stuff, and I ain't trying to take nothing from him. But really, it's really black cops doing it to black Americans, black people, mostly black cops. Because the black cops tried to choke me out and kill me. I still have the marks on my neck and on my arms from the handcuffs. It's really sad how we treat our own people. We treat our own people like shit. And I had enough for it. I've been quiet for so long, Justina. But anyway, I just want to let this know on the radio that we are tired as a people. They're trying to get us to turn on our own people, and I will not stand for it any longer. Something has to be done in the something has to be done in the judicial system, and it has to be set up right for black people. The system is rigged for white America only. I don't care who don't like it, but it's rigged for white America. And I'm going to say that until I get in my grave. It's rigged for white America, and I don't like it. And Justina, it's a whole lot of other things that I want to say, but I don't want to say it on live video. I'm just going to text you. I'm going to have to find me some attorneys because I still have the marks on my arms where the cops illegally beat me up, used aggressive force, didn't take me to the hospital, knowing I had a bunch of headaches, didn't take me to the hospital at all, and used aggressive force just to put me. What they did was just totally just not law. The police officers are breaking the law. That's what's going on. The police officers are breaking the law, and I'm not going to stand for it anyway. They show them these community activists in the neighborhood every time somebody get killed and gunned down. What are you standing up for? Just wanting to show your face on camera. I'm tired of our people wanting to show out their face and they want to be prevalent in the communities that they're not even really prevalent in. They just want to just make their name known by TV, and it's time out for that. It's time out for that, and I'm not standing for that no more. And it's just too much. It's just too much. I'm really upset.
All right, well, what the question is what are you going to do about it, though? Because it's a well-established fact that some law enforcement agencies do not provide a lot of training beyond basic on how to get persons to act toward other folks in the community. You have to understand when it comes to attitudes and personalities, you can legislate conduct, but you cannot legislate a person's bias. You cannot legislate a person's personality, how they feel. You can legislate how they should act toward other people. But unless you get folks with the proper mindset to be dealing with folks, you're going to have problems. There are some folks that get into law enforcement for all different types of reasons. And obviously, the mechanisms that they have in place now to screen out the bad people so they won't become police officers, the ones that have the God complex and all that, have horribly failed. Those things don't always work. But
black person with a hood on is their definition of bad. They pull you over because you're black. I was driving a BMW. I got pulled over every time. One of the cops told me I'm driving a drug dealer car. That's stereotype. That's a stereotype.
Well, what's that called? You know.
Hold, Justin. Justin. What we're gonna do is let him give you a response to your question, so that you have a clear view and idea of exactly what the next steps could be. Remember, it's not legal advice. We're not giving legal advice. We're simply offering information for the community to educate the community. Okay.
Oh, we need to educate the police department first, but okay.
Totally understandable. And you're actually speaking to an assistant chief of police.
Oh, the chief. Oh, this is the chief of police. Well, let me tell you, chief of police, what your officer did to me.
Well, no, Justin, he's aware. Mr. John Carter is an assistant chief of police too.
Yeah.
So what
I'm trying to get you to understand is that all police administrators are not the same. There's no way in our department will we even tolerate complaints of officers handling folks like that. We get rid of them. A lot of departments don't. A lot of officers don't turn in other officers that do things. That's one of the reasons that I became a police officer, because I knew that if a black man was dating a white woman and there was a domestic violence call, no matter who started it, those white officers were going to talk to that damsel in distress first. And they were going to seek that black man in the car and tell him, we are just going to sit you here for our safety, whatever, we're going to come out and talk to you. When they finish talking to her, they come out, tell him to turn around in the seat, put his hands behind his back. They won't even let him out of the car at that point. And they take him to jail. They don't even really ask him what happened. I mean, I saw that happen many, many times. You also have to understand that about 10 years ago, the Aryan Nation, which is a white supremacist group, and the Ku Klux Klan set out a manifesto that they were going to infiltrate the law enforcement agencies, the judicial bench, and the prosecutors. So instead of the Klan buying up, church's chicken as they did and just try to poison black people with that hormone-induced poisonous chicken that they serve at churches, what they did is that they became judges, they became prosecutors, and they became police officers. And they set the tone to how folks were going to start acting. That's why all of a sudden you have begun to see this rash of black folks being shot down like dogs, and they're handled very, very badly in the court system. That's why you're seeing that. The other piece of this, and I'm telling you because I've been in law enforcement for 28 years, I've seen some of everything. These folks are paid to do what they do. And some of the most biased, some of those prejudiced officers against black people are black officers, believe it or not, because they have something to prove. They want to prove to their counterpart that they're not taking sides. The irony of that is that when white officers deal with white folks, they don't have to prove that if the black officer is standing there. Oh, Bob, how's Nancy? Tell the kids I said hi. Don't do this again. Slow it down. Keep your foot off the accelerator so hard, And if a white guy was driving that Mercedes-Benz or that BMW, probably wouldn't have been stopped. When the officer stopped you and said that you're driving a drug dealer's car, that's called racial profiling. He had already tagged you, but you know what? That officer was taught that. He was taught to racially profile, even though in the policy of most departments is that they don't condone or racial profiling. They don't endorse it, but it happens. And they do train officers to racially profile people. I know, because I've been a part of that training. I've sat in academies. I've sat in training academies and seminars where they teach officers that stuff. It still goes on. Even though publicly they'll say that they don't do it, they do it. And it happens all the time. And if they're not formally being taught that by their departments because their departments are serious about not pushing it, the officers on the street that have been there a while, when those guys are riding with FTOs, they're in their training as rookies, or as newly hired transferred officers, they get taken to the neighborhoods that are so-called bad, and they point out the folks in those neighborhoods who should be avoided or who should be handled roughly. Mm-hmm. Now, some of these people also, you have to understand, they receive incentives. They receive money to treat people the way that they do, especially certain personalities in Black neighborhoods. It happens, and I'm not going to deny it. And whoever wants to come after me for Senate, come after me. But when you come, you better be ready, because you might not like the result that you get. I've been alive long enough that I'm not backing down from anybody. And I believe that the Lord put me on this earth for a purpose, and the purpose is to reveal the truth. So you have a right to be frustrated. Well, my question is that those politicians that you elected in your community that's supposed to be looking out for your best interest, and to make sure that those rogue, thuggish, outlaw cops are not hired or they're terminated when they engage in that kind of conduct, what are they doing about it? One of the things you need to do is file a complaint with Internal Affairs. Again, we as Black people need to understand what the process is. There is an Internal Affairs that you will report that violation to. You say, well, why would I go to the police to talk about other officers? Well, because that's the process. Does it always work? Absolutely not. But does it work sometimes? It does. It depends. But at least you put something in that officer's record to indicate or flag that they're a bad apple. And if enough people complain about him or her, they will have to act or terminate them before they kill someone. And if they don't do that and the officer ends up killing someone, then that liability comes back on the department, because they look in the officer's record and see that they had numerous complaints on them. And that's what makes the city end up paying millions of dollars for the acts of certain officers when they do things. Because it was very clear and documented that this officer had a propensity of violence against the public that they were sworn to serve. They had no right to still be in that job or to keep that job. And the way to get rid of it is to get rid of those officers when they start displaying that kind of conduct. But the only way that the command staff is going to know that is people have to report it. So when that happens, you need to file a complaint with Internal Affairs, and then wait and see what Internal Affairs is going to do. Give them a chance to do their process. And if you don't like the result of their process, for the injuries that you sustain with the handcuffs digging into your skin, or if he slams you down, get a copy of your medical record, be treated by the doctor, you can still bring a civil suit. So even if Internal Affairs says that the officer did nothing wrong, it doesn't mean that you don't have physical injury and emotional distress from what happened. You can still sue the department and that officer civilly. But now, when you sue, don't just sue the police department, sue the officer as an individual as well. That way, the city will have to come and ask you to relieve the officer from the lawsuit, because they're going to indemnify him and they'll step in his shoes and allow themselves to be sued in his place. If they offer you that, don't do that. Just use it as a bargaining chip and say, no, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sue this officer. I'm going to file a list pendants against his house and any property that he owns. And I'm going to foreclose his house and take it, because he shouldn't have done this to me, because I'm going to do that so he won't transfer it to his aunt or uncle or sell it or whatever. So if I win the lawsuit, then he'll file bankruptcy and say that he doesn't have any money to pay me. So you tie up all of his assets. Now, the city is going to come to his rescue because they're obligated to do that. So what you've just done in doing something like that is that you've forced them to come to the bargaining table to settle the case rather than take it to trial. It'll never make it to trial under those circumstances, because people are not going to take jobs and go out and do jobs if they risk being sued for doing their job. But they're not being sued for doing their job. They're being sued because they violated their own policies and they're out there harming people. But until the community takes an aggressive stand against that type of conduct, I mean a very aggressive stand against that conduct, it isn't going to stop. But on the flip side, because a dime is thin, but it has two sides. All the way in San Diego, California, just yesterday on the news, it talked about the violence in the Chicago area and how the gangs are out there just murdering people, just shooting them down in the streets like animals. It even happened on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And the murder rate there is higher than what it is in New Orleans and Los Angeles combined, which is absolutely ridiculous. What the larger question is why is that happening? Why is that police chief that's there still in his office? Why does he still have a job if that's going on? His job is to come up with some strategy to prevent that from happening. One of the ways to do it is through this concept called community-based policing. The reason that the cops are so aggressive there in Chicago is because they have and they use a process called team-based policing. So they police the community as a team, as us against them. In community-based policing, the officers are mandated, they're forced by the department to get out of their cars, to make contact with the public, to go to the porch of the old lady and have a cup of coffee with her, to go into the coffee shops, to have coffee with people in the morning, to stop at the Starbucks. They have to interact with the community. And when you get to know an officer personally, and they have to get to know you, more likely than not, when a person does commit an offense against the public or against people in the community, somebody's going to call up that officer because they know the officer personally, because they're having coffee with him or her, and they're seeing them on an everyday basis, and they're talking to their kids and playing with their kids and playing basketball with their kids. They're going to tell what's going on. But in a team-based policing concept, that us against them, a person can watch someone be shot down in the street a block away and won't even call the police because they don't want to get involved. That's what team-based policing does. But community-based policing is an entirely different strategy, an entirely different concept. It works. It's been proven for 50 years. It works.
Unfortunately, it seems that the approach in Chicago has been through CAPS, which is supposedly the community-based department within each police station that will work with the community leaders. CAPS can be effective, but it seems that they don't have adequate outreach within the community. So from the officers that I've worked with as a community leader in our district, some of them have been from the community, which is definitely a plus because they understand the community. They know the residents in the community. They have a vested interest in the community. Typically, those CAPS officers are brown. I have not engaged a Caucasian CAPS officer, believe it or not. But boots on the ground are not the CAPS officers. And those are the community policing. I'll have to look up exactly what the acronym means, but many of us are familiar with CAPS. They host the annual barbecues and all of those fun things. But when we really, and it seems that CAPS, their goal, from my understanding, is to be proactive and not necessarily reactive. And that if the community, no different than a block party, did more outreach to CAPS, that they'd be more engaged with the community.
Yeah, but see, let me tell you why just having a segment of the police department to do that community-based policing doesn't work. Because you still have the thug officers that are out there beating people up and shooting them down. Because the officers that volunteer for CAPS, because that's what they have to do, they're of the mindset, well, they're not out there doing it anyway. But the officers who need to be in that unit are not going to volunteer to go there, or they don't even work in the jurisdiction where they are, contacting the people that they don't like on a day-to-day basis. Anyway, they only get called there if they're covering a shift or if something happens. And you can believe if that's the case, when they drive into that neighborhood, they already have a mindset that whoever they come against that crosses them is going to go to jail, injured, by the way, if they survive at all. That's the problem. So it can't be a CAPS program. It has to be a citywide, department-wide policy that every single officer on the street is a community-based police officer, and they need to train them as such. And that officer should be required to get out of that car for at least 2 hours out of his shift and directly interact socially with members of that community where they serve. Every single officer has to do that.
Okay.
Something also has to be done to stop the violence in the community. Now, I attribute the violence in the community to the lack of leadership by the elected officials that are there. But for some reason, they stay in office. They allow their constituents to be locked up for extended periods of time with no real due process. They allow prosecutors to allow them to sit in jail way beyond 180 days without a trial. And just when you get out, oh well, you get out. And then if a person was found to have been arrested wrongfully and they served a year or two in jail or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years, which they can never get back, by the way, how are they compensated? Or does the city just let them out, the county let them out, the state let them out and just say, oh, sorry about that. We thought you were a drug dealer because you were driving a BMW. How are they compensated? See, if it starts costing money for doing folks wrong and for making mistakes like that, you'll see the whole attitude of all of those people change. It will, because when that money comes out of their budgets, their functioning budgets, it's too much. They said last night on the news out here that the police chief's response or answer to all of the violence in Chicago, to the gangs and whatnot, was to hire another 1,000 officers.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hire another 1,000 officers to put on the street. You know what kind of resource that is against the taxpayers? No wonder they're giving parking tickets and red light tickets that cost $3 and $4 and $5 and $600. No wonder they're not cutting deals with people to allow them to pay those fines, but they're tripling them and then adding penalties and taxes on top of it, which makes it usury, which is also a violation of law. But they don't care because they need the money, because they need to hire 1,000 officers. I just don't see how much longer the city is going as a civilized culture under the current circumstances. And if you think things are bad there now, wait till after January 20th and watch what happens.
Yeah.
It's going to get worse. So I appreciate the caller calling in. I hate that happened to you, but you need to follow up. You need to go to the doctor. You need to be seen. You need to have the doctor to actually write up that your injuries were directly caused by this blunt force trauma, or however it happened, to get that in a medical report by a doctor. And if the emergency room doctor wouldn't do it, go to your own doctor and get it. But you just need to document it somehow and keep that. And then you need to file a report with Internal Affairs and make sure you send a copy of your injuries to that. And if you were emotional distress, going through emotional trauma, you couldn't sleep, you lost your appetite or whatever, here's another thing that Black folks don't do. We don't follow up with the things that happen to us. We just kind of internalize it. We take it out on families, we take it out on our kids, we take it out on ourselves. What you need to do is go to one of these clinics out there and talk to a psychologist, talk to a psychiatrist, and tell them how you feel. You need to document that stuff. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean they're going to stop you from buying a gun. You're not telling them you want to hurt yourself. Don't do that. But if you really do want to hurt yourself, you need to tell them so you can get some help. But you need to document things that happen to you and express how they traumatize you. Because when it comes to filing a lawsuit, you have to show damages. Damages is a part of an element to any civil lawsuit. And just because you lose the case criminally does not mean necessarily that you're going to lose the case civilly. You can prevail, but you at least have to try. Too many things happen to us, and we just walk away. So, oh well. And let me tell you, one of the most ignorant statements I used to hear, I don't hear it so much now, is, well, it must not have been intended for me. It must have been God's will, or it must have been God's will that this or that happened. No, some things, it has nothing to do with God. There's a devil too somewhere out there. And there's a lot of people that worship him and don't even believe in God at all. So it's not just God's will because bad stuff happened and you have to accept it. You have to be aggressive and push back. And if the entire community does that and get rid of those worthless, thankless politicians and put people in office from the community, from the grassroots community, you'll see a big change. So the next time, and in this next election that's held out there, the person who talks about how much money that they've acquired and buy the folks the most drinks in the club and the ones that got the most women, running around, don't vote for them. Those are the corrupt ones. But the humble person who is going to the PTA meetings and doing things with the kids in the school and going to the basketball games and actually out there doing things with the kids and in the Boy Scouts and the Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts and leaders of all these things, those are the people that you need to be trying to put in office. The grassroots folks in the community, because they understand.
So that brings us once again to, drum roll please, recall petitions. Our community leaders, I just want to say this. We have, and as the caller, Justin Turner, had mentioned, that there are a lot of people running around protesting and ultimately have no plan. They want media time, no different than our elected officials. And I say this from experience as a former PR person for an elected official. Our community leaders are at the forefront of these issues. They're in front of the cameras. They're not bringing the plans. They're behind closed doors having meetings with the folks that they should be transparent with. So what happens when our boots on the ground folks start taking positions under the folks that are currently harming the community? We have no real people in the community representing the community that actually live in the community, mind you.
How can a person be an elected official to represent people in a district where they don't live? But I know it happens. A lot of the gangs and the drug things that are going on there in Chicago, don't think that those guys are not being paid by the powers that be to do that foolishness. They have an alliance or understanding with somebody, because let me tell you something. If the FBI wanted to stamp out those gangs and stop it, they can do it in 90 days. They've done it in the past. They can do a sweep because they know who the gangbangers are. They know who the violent people are. They know the people who are out there committing the murders. But if I'm a politician and you're a gangbanger and I got people out there that I don't like, or there are people that are coming against me, and all I got to do is pick up the phone and say, Justina, you know what? I'll pay you $5,000 to go send in some of your people to go knock off this person or that person. Word, I'm going to do it. $5,000 now. Mm-hmm. And you call up one of your cronies and they go do it. Is there any incentive at all for me as the elected representative of the community to fix that? I got my own thug gang that do whatever I ask them and tell them to do.
Well, I think it is concerning our elected officials now, because unfortunately, a tragic situation recently within the last month, our 7th Congressional District congressman, his grandson at 15 years old was murdered in the same district that I live in. And the call to action is for more policing, of course, and we've already discussed the fact that that harms the taxpayers long term. So when we deal with an incumbent that has been in office for many, many years, and he's an elder that I do respect, what are the next steps for the community? Because now his household has been directly impacted by a murder, the murder of his grandchild at 15 years old, okay? As a leader, the reflection of how that, I can't imagine how he feels at this point, but what can the people take to that particular elected official aside from the recall petition?
Well, they can ask him to resign if he don't want to be recalled. He's been there long enough. See, one of the problems in the community are career politicians. That's a big part of the problem. You know, there's an old saying that says power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. The longer those folks are in office and the more deals they cut in it, and the more elbows they rub with other corrupt folks, it goes deep. And then for him, unfortunately, it's sad to say, it came to roost home. It came to bite him. You know, a lot of stuff in Chicago, it seems like it's not far from the days of Al Capone, the way that they used to settle grudges, you know, between rival gangs. You want to get rid of the gangs, call the FBI. Oh, but I forgot. Those guys are being paid by the folks in Washington to keep the gang violence high. Why? Because then you get the funding from the federal government to hire 1,000 police officers to buy 1,000 police cars and spend $70,000 per car to equip them. See? So if you stamp out the violence and take away the gang problem, then there's no money that's going to keep coming in because you've eliminated the violence, which is the cause for you to get the funding in the first place. Because if the violence wasn't so bad, that chief certainly wouldn't get he wouldn't get funding from the feds to hire 1,000 police officers. That's a lot of people. And not only do you hire them and pay them salaries, you got to provide insurance for them, workers' comp. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. You know, and the poor taxpayer in Chicago, I mean, that community member is coming out of pocket for that because their cost of to live every day is going up. But the protection isn't going to get one iota better. It isn't. So if I hire 1,000 police officers, doesn't that mean that somewhere I've looked at an actuarial chart or been told or looked at an actuarial table and I know that the crime is going to increase? Because what happens if the crime is eliminated and you put all the bad guys out of the community or you put them in jail? What happens to the 1,000 extra officers you just hired if in 3 years you eradicate the problem? So what are those 1,000 officers going to do? Become their officers, become preschool teachers, become plumbers? Or are they going to go get an exciting job in electronics? What are they going to do? So if you hire them and insure them and put them on the workers' comp and equip them and buy vehicles, it means that they're going to have something to do. What that does to my legal mind, to my cop mind, it raises my suspicion that something is about to happen when this administration changes over on January 20th. That means that the lives of the people in that city is about to get much worse. But folks look at things for face value. It's like, you know, Christian people do when they read the Bible. They read the Bible and they take it on face value for what it says instead of extrapolating the principle of what it's trying to teach. And that is pure insanity, because that is not what that text is saying. That is not what that means. That is not what the historical account means. But if you're so shallow that you read it and you think, oh, well, that is what this means, then you're mistaken. And you're going to die. And if people listen to that chief or listen to those folks in the community and say, hey, by hiring 1,000 new cops, that's going to make our situation better because we're going to reduce the crime, that is a lie. That is not going to happen. If he's hiring 1,000 cops, it means that you better look out and hold on because this crap is about to get a lot worse. Because we have to hire an army now. If that's the case, why don't you just bring the National Guard in and cross-train them and make them weekend warriors, because at least they're already being paid from a government fund. They're already on the taxpayer's roll. Why would you bring in more brand new people that you have to vet? And now they're going to have worse cops because guess what? The white supremacists already put in that whenever there's openings in big police departments like Chicago, they're going to apply. And they are, and they have. Pure stupidity. It's just absolutely stupid. You'll want to get rid of this, get rid of the people that you have in office, get those people out and put some grassroots community people in. And we don't need new cops. We need economic development in that community. Mm-hmm. What I want to hear politicians talk about is how we're going to come in here and bring some Fortune 300 and 400 companies in here, and we're going to increase our economic bottom line. We're going to create some jobs. We're going to build some businesses here. We're going to create entrepreneurship. We're going to give these folks something to do rather than shoot each other, because if they're busy making money, they can't be out there busy shooting people down. That's what they said that the gang stuff is about, money, right? It's about territorial money. But if everybody's in their own hood, in their own little thing, making money and creating widgets and things that they're selling across the country and even overseas, do you think they got time to do that?
Absolutely not.
You know, there was a gang in Chicago years ago, you know, called the Disciples. They were a horrible street gang. They did all kinds of things to people, major atrocities. But you know what? One day they got a leader that said, you know what, man, we're going about this all wrong. Instead of wearing the saggy pants and the, you know, shirt and the bandanas and all, let's buy some business suits. Let's learn how to fit into this corporate setting and learn how to work the system and make money without having to look over our shoulders. And when they started doing that, they made 10 times the money that they were making just being the common street thugs. They blended better. They were hard to find. And guess what? Some of them made enough money and got a quality of life that kind of lifestyle, the thug gang banging person, wasn't what they wanted to be anymore. They truly wanted to be the entrepreneur that they had become. They got out of it, those that could. So they became more enterprising, is what I'm saying.
Okay. And it seems like, well, actually not it seems, I just want to say this, in about 2 shows, we'll have a guest on who can, and unfortunately, he's not an elected official here, but he is the CEO of one of our nonprofits here on the in Chicago on the West Side. And their main focus, community economic development, workforce development training, education training programs. The exact conversation and solutions that we need for our community. And that is not the discussion that enough of our elected officials are having. Yes, we have the legislation in place, but again, when it comes down to implementing the plan, how are the community members that have a vested interest, how are they engaged and involved in the process of implementation? And it's not happening. And the sad thing is that we get back to the nonprofit organizations in the community that pop up and or they come in and just bleed our resources dry, just suck our resources dry and move on.
That's true. And most of those nonprofits are really not for the community, or they're run from outside. Let me tell you something. We need to get away from this nonprofit stuff as being the solution. That's another misnomer, because no one goes into business not to make a profit. Okay, that's a part of the problem. So these nonprofits that have just become, they are just proliferated everywhere. They have become a part of the problem, not the solution. Instead of hiring 1,000 police officers, bring me 1,000 jobs to the community. Mm-hmm. Show me what's going to happen to employ 1,000 people. Let me tell you what we should do. Instead of depending on the politicians like good Democrats do, right? So I'm not fighting that. I mean, it's a mindset. It's a brainwashed poverty mindset. Poverty is a mindset. It's a mindset. So instead of doing that, what should happen, we should go to Philip Morris. We should go to R.J. Reynolds, outside of the politicians, and say, look, we need to bring economic stability and development to our community. Our politicians have failed us. We need to get rid of them. But in the process, we need to build a community. Ask them to come into the community to bring stability. They'll do it because you're African American, or it's an African American area. You know, it's an empowerment zone. It's an impacted zone. So here's how it works. R.J. Reynolds will bring $100,000 to the table to each entrepreneur that will open up a business in that community. They will help them acquire a building. They will build it out for them. They will stock it. They would even help to provide some training, depending on what kind of program they're doing, in exchange for them promoting R.J. Reynolds, not the tobacco product, because it was the tobacco product that caused the harm to the community in the first place. Because those tobacco companies manufacture and distribute a lot more things than just, tobacco products. They make shortening, cooking oil, toothpaste, toys. They make all kinds of things that folks have no clue because they don't read and they don't research and they don't get their facts straight. But those tobacco companies have come to those Black communities several times. I told you a few programs ago that they gave the state of Illinois over $25 billion, 25 with a B, to do economic development
have
in
got
Black
to
communities.
trace.
That was,
we've got to track that money
years
back.
ago. What happened to that money?
Exactly.
That was 25 years ago.
So I want to.
Who is accountable for that money? Where did it go?
Let's go ahead and wrap up this evening. And I just want to say that next Tuesday, we will have Mr. Ron Carter in the building to discuss with the National Black Wall Street Movement, to discuss the Black Business Corridor, the pending legislation, and what the community needs to do. You have great solutions with regards to contacting RJ Reynolds, and we need to bring all of those solutions together so that the community is fully aware of the next steps. Happy Giving Tuesday. God bless you all. Happy New Year. Be safe. Have a blessed evening. Thank you. The Justice Team with Justina Winfrey and John Carter. Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio.